Reabastecimiento en sistemas pool, o lo que llamaríamos en inglés un Replenishment Pool System. Hola, les saludo a Omar Mora desde Blackberry&Cross en San José, Costa Rica. Esperamos que esté muy bien, que esté con salud, que esté prosperando y que sus proyectos avancen como usted espera o mejor. Gracias por unirse a estas sesiones de podcast y de video que traemos para usted con el propósito de incentivar ideas que ayuden a aumentar la intensidad de sus programas de mejora continua y de innovación. El día de hoy queremos invitarle a que nos acompañe a escuchar y ver un webinar, Webcast, que grabó nuestro colega Lars, el vicepresidente de Desarrollo de Negocios de Morse Team, empresa aliada de Blackberry&Cross desde hace varios años, y en donde estaremos trabajando el tema de cómo funcionan los sistemas de reabastecimiento pool, cómo funcionan los pool systems. En esta sesión usted podrá acompañar a Lars y podrá aprender en una hora cómo configurar los cálculos básicos de un sistema pool. ¿Por qué los cálculos básicos? Bueno, porque el tema es profundo, es amplio, y para poder darle en una hora un contenido apropiado, pues nos vamos a enfocar en temas básicos. También podrá usted aprender cómo hacer estos cálculos usando Process Playground. Debo comentarle que la versión que ve en el video, en la versión de video de este programa de Process Playground, es una versión anterior. Tenemos una nueva versión en el mercado y que usted puede solicitar una prueba comunicándose con nosotros a www.blackberry&cross.com, un software que le dejará configurar sistemas pool, sistemas push, sistemas de administración de bodegas, simulándolos, entre otras cosas. ¿Qué es un sistema de administración de reabastecimiento pool? Eso es parte de lo que usted aprenderá. Aprenderá sobre ciertos cálculos básicos necesarios para implementar un sistema de extracción o pool de reabastecimiento básico. Podrá entender cómo encajan estos sistemas pool en el sistema que tenga usted en su organización para el manejo de los inventarios, y hará simulaciones por computadoras del tirón que llamamos del jalón de materiales, el pool de reabastecimiento en acción. Todo esto patrocinado gracias a nuestro aliado Morse Team, quien trae a ustedes este webcast grabado, y que le invitamos a que, si usted lo está escuchando, lo pueda complementar con la versión en video. Recuerde que nuestros podcasts se difunden por medio de SoundCloud, Spotify y otros canales, y que los videos los encuentra disponibles en YouTube, en Vimeo, en nuestros canales oficiales. Por favor, préstele atención a la sesión. Es una sesión de una hora, una clase completa, y si luego tiene interés puede comunicarse con nosotros para coordinar una sesión privada en donde usted, su compañía, puedan explorar cómo utilizar sistemas pool en su empresa. Recuerden que estos son temas que normalmente cubrimos en nuestro programa de Master Black Belt, pero que también están cubiertos por asesoría y entrenamiento relevante a los sistemas pool en el uso de Process Playground, nuestra herramienta para simulación discreta de este tipo de procesos. Le comento que el webinar es en inglés, así que pues también comprometidos con la práctica de que debemos tener bilingüismo o a manejar más de varios idiomas. Aquí esperamos que esto les sea de utilidad, y estaremos trabajando obviamente también en mejorar otros recursos para quienes sabemos que no están todavía cómodos o cómodas con el idioma inglés, para que puedan tener las transcripciones de la manera más ágil y rápida posible. Por el momento, adelante con la versión en inglés de este webinar, que continúa ya seguidamente, y los dejo con Lars, que es el vicepresidente, como le decía, de Desarrollo de Negocios de Morse Team, empresa aliada de Blackberry&Cross. Recuerde visitarnos en www.blackberry&cross.com.
Welcome to our webcast, Introduction to Replenishment Pull. This is the first session in our fall Master Black Belt webcast series. I'm Larry Goldman, Vice President of Marketing for MorseTeam.com and the moderator of the webcast. This presentation should last about an hour. We're recording it and we'll make it available on the next day via the MorseTeam.com website, along with the slides and additional materials. Here's a brief agenda for today. We'll begin with a short introduction, followed by the lesson on replenishment pull. We plan to leave about 10 minutes at the end of the webcast for Q&A. You'll be on mute for the duration of the webcast. During or after the presentation, if you have a question you'd like to ask, please go to the GoToWebinar questions dialog box on the right side of your screen. If it's collapsed into a small toolbar, just click on the top expansion arrow, write your question in the box, and press Enter. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can in the time we have. A little about moresteam.com. Since 2000, Moresteam has been the leading provider of online Lean Six Sigma training and technology. For individual customers, we offer all levels of online belt training and certification, including courses in Design for Six Lean. Our many enterprise customers benefit from our customizable courses, project tracking and online testing tools, and classroom simulations for Lean and DMAIC projects. In the spring of 2010, Moresteam and the Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University began to jointly offer an innovative Master Black Belt development and certification program. The Master Black Belt program includes 4 weeks of training, 2 of them, about 72 hours, online through the Moresteam portal, and 2 of them at the Ohio State campus in Columbus, Ohio. The curriculum covers the Master Black Belt body of knowledge with topics ranging from advanced DOE to advanced Lean tools to financial analysis to leadership. The faculty includes professors from Ohio State and trainers from Moresteam and Minitab Inc., and the certification process follows the successful completion of the training. This program, which can be started at any time and taken in any order, has been designed to provide maximum convenience, flexibility, and affordability. For more information, you can visit www.moresteam.com or the link that you see right there. Today's presentation, Introduction to Replenishment Pull, is just one of the advanced statistical topics that we cover in even greater detail in the Master Black Belt training program. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Lars Masidvag, Senior Master Black Belt at Moresteam. Lars has been working in the Lean Six Sigma and process improvement industry for over 20 years. While his early career was focused on project execution, training, and coaching, the last several years have focused on curriculum development and training methodologies, much of it in Lean methods. He acted as curriculum director for the George Group for the last 3 of his 11 years with them, before leaving to become more involved in blended learning and advanced process modeling tools. In the Moresteam.com Master Black Belt program, he integrates the learning of Lean tools and concepts with advanced process modeling methods. So with that, over to you, Lars.
Thanks, Larry. Hope everybody can hear me well, and welcome and thank you very much for joining us today. And today we're going to talk about replenishment pull. For those of you who were able to make the summer series of our calls, the first session that I covered there was on what we call core process pull and putting whip caps on system. Today we're going to talk a little bit about replenishment pull, and it will be what we're calling an introduction, because there's actually quite a bit to replenishment pull, so it takes a little more than 45 minutes to cover it typically, but hopefully we'll give you a very good idea of what replenishment pull looks like and where you can use it, and the basics of implementing a replenishment pull system today. So the first topic, first slide here, is why we use pull in a Lean environment. And we use pull because we want to decentralize the control of our processes, decouple portions of our processes, and our lead time through our process can't meet our customer demand. So in our picture here, we have our customer over here on the right, and we have 2 different types of pull systems that we might use to satisfy that customer demand. We can use a replenishment pull system that we'll talk about today when our customer expectation of lead time is sufficiently short that our time that it would take us to get through our process is so long that that would not satisfy our customer. So in that case, we might use a replenishment pull buffer here to satisfy that customer demand. The other option for a pull system that we talked about in our last call was this core process pull, where we actually trigger a signal to our process and then build to order. So if we look at the implementation scope of where we want to try to use replenishment pull systems, here we have a typical process with several sub-processes feeding into our main process, and we might use a pull buffer here for a sub-assembly, and that sub-assembly process may be something that is difficult to synchronize perhaps with our main line, or something that has a sufficiently long lead time that, again, our customer is not willing to wait for us to incur that full lead time. So we might use a replenishment pull buffer here in order to deliver materials to our main process and have that decoupled. In many cases, we can synchronize our process well enough So say perhaps this bottom process here, we might not necessarily need to have a replenishment pull in place if we can synchronize steps 4 and 5 here on the bottom, flowing into step 8 in a timely fashion. If we can do that synchronization, then we might not need a replenishment pull buffer. In the case where we can't do that synchronization or that lead time is too long, we'll put replenishment pull buffers to decouple those portions of our process. We'll typically use pull buffers at our raw materials so that we can decouple our supplying process from our internal process if that supply takes a long time to get or there's some variation there. And finally, the one thing that I didn't show here is that we may need to actually use a replenishment pull buffer right at the very end of our process in order to make it so that our customer can have immediate satisfaction of their demand. So in a case of a commodity item, such as groceries or pens and pencils at Office Mart or whatnot, then we probably have those things in stock as finished goods because the customer expectation of that lead time is very short, and therefore they will not be willing to incur the waiting time for any of our process. If, however, there is a reasonable expectation that it will take some time to get whatever item that they are demanding produced, then we may be able to have some of our process steps actually in a make-to-order type of mode where the customer does wait for those steps to be completed. So that gives you an idea of where we might use replenishment pull. And the main concept here is that we use replenishment pull when we need to decouple different portions of our process. A little bit about the difference between core process pull and replenishment pull. In core process pull, where we're talking about setting WIP caps and whatnot, we are very much focused on a process, and we're concerned about how much work in process is flowing through that process. We don't concern ourselves with which type of WIP it is, but rather just the total quantity. Versus in a replenishment pull system, we are focused on a part by part here. Every buffer will need to be set and sized for each part that we want to manage on a replenishment pull system. A core process pull system, we actually determine the lead time by using Little's Law and setting our WIP cap. That lead time then becomes an input for a replenishment pull system, and that's a critical input for a replenishment pull system. In core process pull, we're really concerned with managing our lead time so that we can get ourselves into a make-to-order environment, whereas in replenishment pull, we are deciding on our stocking levels and we are making to stock, again, in order to decouple some portion of our process or perhaps our entire process from the ultimate demand. Replenishment pull systems tend to be primarily used in manufacturing and distribution systems. However, they do have a place in service environments where we might be using replenishment pull to manage the stock of any of our support materials that we need for providing our service. We can't typically stock services because they need to be delivered on demand, but we can stock all of the associated support materials for those services. In both core process pull and replenishment pull, we have the option for using electronic systems or using physical systems where we might use Kanban cards and whatnot. So both of the systems have multiple ways that they can be implemented. All right, let's look a little bit at some of the key parameters of a replenishment pull system. The first parameter we have is the cycle time. So the cycle time is the amount of time between the arrival of our replenishment orders. So if you think of a queue or a buffer in our process, and say we start with a full buffer, right? And here's our x-axis. Start with that full buffer, and then we consume product over a period of days, and we finally get to the bottom of our buffer size here, and then we'll receive another replenishment, and then do our consumption, receive another replenishment, and do our consumption. And so we end up with a typical sawtooth pattern of the consumption of inventory. So the amount of time between replenishments of that inventory is what we are calling our cycle time. So cycle time between the arrival of replenishment orders. Another component, a key parameter that we need in sizing our pull system here is, of course, the lead time. Because while we have this cycle time that we've talked about between how long it takes between orders arriving, we also, of course, need to know how long it is going to take for that order to arrive. So this is from our vendors or from our own process that might be upstream that is getting these replenishments to us. And so we need to understand what is that lead time and how long is that going to take before we get that replenishment buffer, that order into our buffer. That lead time could be driven by a number of different factors. Transportation or shipping time might be the prime factor. So how long does it take for an order to get shipped to us? Maybe the main driver of our lead time. Production time may be another driver of that lead time. Batch size might be another driver of that lead time. So if we are being replenished from a process that operates in a batch mode, the batch sizes of that process and all the other parts that exist on that process will tell us how long it's going to be between batches for our item, and that length of time between batches can end up being the driving factor of our lead time. Another batch environments, when we do have a batch process that is fulfilling our replenishments, whatever that batch size is that flows through that replenishing process, that batch size will become the batch size that we need to use in our replenishment buffer. So if that batch size is, say, a batch size of 100, and we're consuming 10 items per day, then we are going to have a cycle time of 10 days. So in a batch environment, the batch size actually tells us what our cycle time is going to be. Finally, the last key parameter that we're going to need is our demand rate. And for our demand rate, we are going to need to know both the average, or the mean, as well as the standard deviation of that demand. We want to understand how much variation and what that demand looks like so that we can properly understand how we need to size our safety stocks in our replenishment pull systems. So those are the key parameters: cycle time, lead time, and demand rate. We're going to move on to the next slide here, and we'll actually talk about how we actually use those key parameters in sizing our replenishment pull system. Now, replenishment pull system sizing is pretty straightforward when you look at it, and appears relatively easy, and it really is. The devil, of course, is always in the details of implementation, and implementation can cause you to run into lots of different situations and nuances that make implementing a pull system a little bit more challenging and taking a little bit more experience than just these equations by themselves would tend to indicate. So let's start off here and look at these sizing calculations. The first thing to note is we are talking about a replenishment pull system. And I'm highlighting system because it's absolutely crucial to understanding how a replenishment pull works. We do have to think of replenishment pull as a system of both on-hand and on-order inventory. We are always thinking about on-hand and on-order together and the sum of those two quantities of inventory. And that defines what the system is. Many traditional inventory management systems might look only at on-hand and neglect on-order. Another system might look at on-order and manage those orders, and if the two are not connected, then we really can't possibly have a rational approach to managing our inventory if we don't know what's in the entire system. Working stock is our first item that we need to be concerned with in terms of our calculations. So working stock is the on-hand inventory that cycles up and down as we are consuming and using inventory. So this is the inventory that forms our normal sawtooth consumption that we see in our regular consumption and replenishment of inventory. So working stock is equal to the average demand, mean demand, times the cycle time. So if we had an example, say, where our average demand was 2 and our cycle time was 10 days, then we would be looking at 20 pieces of inventory as our working stock. Safety stock is the next key component in sizing a replenishment pull system. This is on-hand on-hand inventory, just as a working stock is on-hand inventory. Safety stock, however, is inventory that is not designed to normally cycle, but rather to be there as a protection barrier against variation. The standard formula for safety stock that you'll see in most business school and industrial engineering texts includes a factor called service level, and that is typically a 2 or a 3, times the square root of lead time times the standard deviation of demand. S. And that's the typical formula. You will often see it written in a little bit different order than this. You'll often see it written as the service level, say 2 times the standard deviation times the square root of the lead time in that order. And we'll talk a little bit more in a couple slides about why I've written it in this order. Okay, so safety stock and working stock together represent the inventory that we have on hand in our facility. Typically, the safety stock isn't what we call moving stock, but of course we'd use a proper FIFO queue so that it does move and get replenished with fresh inventory and whatnot. But the working stock is that stock which logically is moving in the system. The safety stock is that stock which is logically system and protecting against that variation. Finally, the last calculation we need to do is for replenishment stock. The replenishment stock is the on-order inventory, which refills our on-hand stock. The calculation for replenishment stock is, again, our average or mean demand times the lead time for that replenishment. So in this example, again, with our average demand of 2, if we have, say, a lead time of 15 days, then we would say we have 30 pieces of replenishment stock, working with our 20 pieces of working stock here, and whatever this calculation for safety stock would have yielded for us. So those are the calculations, pretty straightforward. Working stock, safety stock, and replenishment stock. 3 different buckets of inventory that we need to keep track of in sizing and running a replenishment pull system. Okay, replenishment pull operation. So we understand now the components of replenishment pull. We've done the calculations. They're pretty straightforward. Now we just need to understand the basic rules for how to operate a replenishment pull system. Okay, the maximum inventory in the system. So remember that the system consists of both on-hand and on-order. So we always need to look at the total balance of inventory on-hand and on-order in the system. And the maximum that will ever be allowed to be will be the sum of working stock plus safety stock plus replenishment stock. Those 3 components, our 3 components from the previous slide, together form the full system for replenishment pull. Our trigger point for reorder is just safety stock plus replenishment stock. So you can see how I've lined these up. If we draw a vertical line in front of safety stock, then you'll see that the one item that exists in the maximum inventory calculation and doesn't exist in the trigger point calculation is just this working stock, because that working stock is what is going to be cycling. And so that cycles up and down between the maximum inventory point and the trigger point. So our trigger rule becomes, if our on-hand inventory plus our on-order inventory is less than or equal to the trigger point, then we place an order to return the system back up to maximum inventory. So this is saying that if we find that we have consumed inventory down to our minimum, to our trigger point, we are going to replenish and then consume again and then replenish and then consume again and replenish to create that sawtooth pattern of consumption. All right, let's do a little example to put some this. Numbers always help with some understanding. So here we have an example where we have a cycle time of 5 days, a lead time of 10 days, a demand of 2 per day, and I'm not going to do the formal calculation for safety stock on this slide. We'll do that on the next slide. For now, let's just say that our safety stock is equal to just simply 2 pieces. So our working stock calculation is our cycle time, 5, times our demand of 2 per day. So 5 days times 2 per day equals 10 pieces. Our safety stock is a given at 2 pieces. And our replenishment stock is going to be our lead time times our demand per day. So our lead time of 10 days times our demand per day of 2. 10 days times 2 pieces per day equals 20 pieces of replenishment stock. So our rule is going to be, remember that our trigger point is going to be safety stock plus replenishment stock. So our trigger point is going to be, let's see here, get my pen working again. See if that brings us back. All right, momentary technical difficulty while I let me pop out of the presentation here and see if I can get my pen working again. All right, let's see if we're back in business here. Pointer options, felt tip. All right, there we go, trigger point. Our trigger point is going to be our replenishment stock plus our safety stock. So in this case, that's 20 plus 2, or 22. And our maximum is going to be our replenishment stock plus our safety stock plus our working stock. So in this case, 32. So our rule simply becomes, take a look at your on-hand plus your on-order inventory. And if that falls down to 22 or less pieces total, then we will place an order to get us back up to the maximum amount. And that maximum amount is 32. So if we find at the end of the day we have, say, 20 pieces in on-hand and on-order inventory, that will cause us to place an order for 12 pieces to replenish ourselves back up to a full maximum system of 32. Okay. We'll do some more examples here with a sample spreadsheet that you'll be able to download tomorrow after the call. Before we go there, though, let's take a quick look at a little bit of safety stock information here. So safety stock is a webinar or 10 in and of itself as far as the nuance and the depth of detail you can get to in looking at different approaches to safety stock. This standard safety stock formula is derived from a statistical look at the idea that if we are here at this point in time, time 0, and we have some lead time portion of time out for how long it will take for our replenishment to get to us, then we have the potential that we might have a high period of demand and then a low period of demand, or a low period of demand in, say, time 1, and then, say, by time 2 we might have yet another high period of demand or yet another low period of demand in time 2, and so forth and so on out to the end of lead time. So this formula is a statistically accurate and concise method for looking at the amount of variation that might occur out at the end of our lead time period. So that's where the derivation of the formula comes to, and it takes a much longer description than just that to understand where this comes from. But the square root of lead time term and the standard deviation of demand term really work together here to talk about how much variation could potentially be out here at lead time periods of time from where we are now. And then our service level, typically a 2 or a 3, is really just related to the assumption that we're going to have normal variation in our demand. And if we have normal variation in demand, we're of course not concerned down here about low demand, because low demand isn't going to cause a stock out. We're only concerned with high demand up here on the right side. And if we say we are going to have a service level of 2, then we're just simply saying we want up to 2 standard deviations worth of high side demand covered, And with that service level of 2 on this one-tailed distribution, that would actually give us 97.7% service level or fill rate. And if we went to a service level of 3, about here, that would give us a fill rate of 99.87. So that really just relates to this single tail normal distribution plot. The assumption, of course, is normally distributed demand, and that we are not in a trending period or any seasonal behavior or whatnot. So that's just a little bit about where safety stock comes from and that calculation comes from. Now, let me show you a couple of different tools that we have available for you to work with and look at and practice with. So I'm going to switch now to the Excel spreadsheet that we will have available. And this Excel spreadsheet, as it comes up here on your screens, this Excel spreadsheet is actually going to be available for you to download tomorrow. It does have some macros in it, some Visual Basic macros, and so I'm enabling that content right now, and you would have to do the same in your systems. You don't have to enable the content in order to use the spreadsheet. I'll show you what that content does for you. In the version that you'll be able to download, this chart that we have over on the right actually be down below this block of yellow cells to make it a little bit easier to read. But for today, in order to fit it all on the webinar screen, I've moved the chart up to the right. So what we have here in this tool is a simple way for you to enter your parameters of your pull system and see what that would actually look like. So if we think about the system that we just did the exercise for, I think we had an average demand of 2 per day, and so we can put that average demand of 2 in. And let's say we have a standard deviation of just 0.2, so not a lot of variation. And we had a replenishment lead time of 5 days, and we had a cycle time of 2 days. Now I'll go ahead and click the Uniform Data button there and wait for your screens to update. So when I click the Uniform Data button, what that does is it takes our average demand that I've entered over here on the left side in the row number 9 there. It takes that information and just copies it down this demand column. And that allows us to see the steady state, no variation view of how our replenishment pull system would work. Now if we look at our chart over here on the right, above the x-axis we have this blue sawtooth of our consumption and replenishment showing. And below the x-axis, using the y-axis over on the right, we actually see the on-order amount that we might have at any given point. So let me make a little bit of a alteration here to our parameters so that we can make the chart show up a little bit larger. I'm going to make my average demand 5, and I'm going to make my cycle time 5. So we're now going to have lead time and cycle time equal to the same amount, and I will update the uniform data. Okay, so as this updates on your screen here, we will see that now we have a very stable, regular sawtooth pattern, and we see we have replenishments all the time. So we have green bars showing below that we always have replenishment orders out and pending, waiting to come in. So when we have a replenishment time, lead time of, say, 5 days in this case, and a cycle time of 5 days, the same amount, then we will always have one order out waiting to come in as we work through our sawtooth here of consumption and replenishment. If our lead time is less than our cycle time, and I'm going to make the lead time now 2.5 days, or rather 2 days, there it is. That'll update on your screens in a moment here. So as we make our lead time shorter than our cycle time, then you'll see we still have our same sawtooth of consumption and replenishment in our on-hand inventory, but now the green bars you see have some white space between them, because now we don't have to have an order out and pending all the time, because it only takes 2 days to get an order. So here in our green bars we have our 2 green bars representing our 2 days. that we have that order pending, and then the order comes in and we get our replenishment. And we consume for 3 days, and when we have consumed for 3 days, we then reach our trigger point and trigger a new order, which takes only 2 days to come in. That's the case where our replenishment lead time is shorter than our cycle time, and that would be a typical case for what we might call a B or a C class part, something that doesn't take too long to get, but that we tend to carry more of it on hand because it's relatively less expensive. Now, if we look at a different picture where instead of the lead time being shorter than the cycle time, it actually becomes longer. I'll switch it now to 8 days. When we switch to 8 days, you'll see that the picture changes. The working stock is still the same, right? We're still at the very same replenishment sawtooth that we've always had, but now we see a pretty dramatic change in the amount of orders that we have outstanding. We have a couple of days where we only have 1 order outstanding, but then we have 3 days where we actually have 2 orders outstanding, because now our lead time for replenishment is actually 8 days. And so we have some overlap where we've got 1 order that's on order that we're still waiting to come in, and we actually place a second order on top of that order that needs to begin processing for it to come in. So that's what we're seeing on the chart. I'm going to slide the chart off to the right a little bit here so that you can see components of our spreadsheet in the main body here. We start at day 1, and it will tell us what our on-hand inventory is, what our on-order inventory is, any arrivals that have happened. The actual demand that's going to happen on that day is in the next column, and that's the blue column there. And then at the end of our day, the spreadsheet will tell us again what our on-hand, on-order is at the end of the day. It will let us know whether or not we need to trigger with either a yes or a no. And if we do need to trigger, it will then tell us what that new order size is going to be. And that new order size, recall, is going to be whatever it takes to get from our current amount of inventory in the system, both on hand plus on order, up to the maximum inventory that's allowed in the system. And then we finally see here the days until due. The last column tells us how many days until that is due. And so here we have an order of 25 in the first row here that is due in 8 days. And so if we look down at our arrivals, 8 days later, here is our arrival of 25 pieces. And we can see that and follow that through the system. Now the sizing parameter entered over here in the left. And it will actually fill it in with random data. I'll put a little bit more variation into our system here. We have an average demand of 5 and a standard deviation of 3. And then if I press the random normal data button, you'll see here in a moment as your screen updates that now we have a much more rough, jaggedy curve here showing our consumption and our replenishment. And it looks like here right about at period 16, day 16, we have a pretty deep dive into our safety stock. And if we look back over here at our spreadsheet, we can actually see that we had 3 days there where we had demand of 10, 6, and 13. And actually they were even preceded by 2 additional days of 9, 7, 10, 6, and 13. So that's 5 days in a row of abnormally high demand, sometimes nearly 3 times our average demand. And we see that reflected in a steeper consumption of inventory in our chart, as well as, if we look down here in the green bars, we can see that we placed additional orders more quickly. So that's an important learning point in how replenishment pull systems heal themselves. If we have abnormal demand, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click us back to our uniform data so we have a nice clean sawtooth again. If we have abnormal demand that happens early in our replenishment process, so we've just received a replenishment and we get some abnormal demand early in that time period, and I'll do that by introducing a little extra demand manually typed into our spreadsheet here. So if we get that demand early in our replenishment cycle, you'll see by the chart here, the pull system probably responds to that by ordering a replenishment sooner. So we're at the top of our sawtooth, we have some extra demand. That's not going to cause us a stock out. What it's going to do is just cause that next replenishment order to trigger more quickly, and we'll order that replenishment sooner. If we get that abnormal demand later in our process, that's where we have to use our safety stock to cover that variation in demand, because it's happened towards the bottom of our replenishment cycle. So a pull system, replenishment pull system, can heal itself in two ways. It can either consume safety stock and make the next order larger to replenish that extra stock, safety stock that was consumed, or it can simply order sooner to get a replenishment order in sooner if that abnormal demand happened at the beginning of our replenishment goal where we were fairly full buffer. In sizing your replenishment parts, it makes a bit of difference here in how much risk you're going to have in each part based on your cycle time. Here we have a part with 5 days cycle time. And so if you look at the number of valleys that we have in our sawtooth here, we've got 6 on our screen. That means we have 6 risk points where we're down at the bottom of our replenishment cycle near our safety stock. And if we have an abnormal spike in demand when we're at the bottom of one of our consumption sawtooths here, then we have a greater chance of stock out. So while we have this part cycling every 5 days and therefore we're keeping our inventory levels low, we do expose ourselves to more risk points. Versus if I make the cycle time of that part 15 days, wait for your screens to update here, with a 15-day cycle time, you can see that our sawtooth becomes much bigger because now we're going to have to carry a lot more working stock to last us for 15 days rather than 5 days. So our average inventory is going to go up, but the trade-off here is we have relatively few risk points, only 2 troughs that are showing on the screen now versus 6 that we had at 15 days. So as we think about sizing replenishment pull systems, the number of days that we choose for our cycle times has a big impact on how we need to manage our safety stock. So large cycle times can lead us to not necessarily have to carry as much safety stock because we have fewer of these risk points, but it does raise our average inventory. And so that becomes the trade-off that you need to balance as you're sizing your pull systems. Other factors that can go into your cycle time and your safety stock, how they interact with each other, is whether or not you use that item in more than one place in your facility. So if you have an item that's used in multiple places, then you can lower your individual safety stocks at each of those multiple places, knowing that between the different places that that item is used, you do carry enough safety stock to buffer against unanticipated swings in demand throughout the entire facility. So those are the additional type of nuances that start to play into how you set up a pull system and determine the cycle times versus the lead times versus the safety stocks. So this spreadsheet is going to be available for you to experiment with and see how pull systems work. You get to look at both the numerical output and how it triggers and when it decides to trigger, as well as this graphical output, so you can learn a little bit about it and experiment a little bit. The safety stock formula that is used in the spreadsheet is the standard safety stock formula. You do get to enter the service level here as a user parameter, but otherwise it is simply the service level times square root of lead time times the standard deviation of demand. Okay, one last thing that we want to show you today before we get into our question section is a new tool that we have out at More Steam. and this is called our Process Playground Simulator. So the Process Playground Simulator is a web-based discrete event simulator, and we are in our final beta testing at this point, and expect to have this released, I would say, certainly within the year, but probably within the month. We'll have our first release out and ready for use. So the discrete event simulator, for those that aren't familiar with it, allow you to actually build your process map in a simulation tool and then run that process with the various different distributions of demand and service times and whatnot that you might put into it. I've got a simple model here. Let me start from scratch actually. So I'll hit clear model button here and start a new model where we just simply drag an activity, and a buffer that will become a replenishment pool buffer is dragged into the modeling area. And then finally I'm going to drag down our demand block and drop that in. And so you can see this is set up as a pull system where our demand is coming from the customer here and will transmit a signal up to our buffer asking for replenishment. And then our buffer will send a replenishment order up to our activity here. So I do need to add a replenishment pull link between our buffer and our activity in order to have a link for that buffer to transmit its replenishment pull signal. And if I click on our buffer here, over on the left, you'll see the information for the queue actually pop up and gives us our ability to enter our replenishment pull system parameters. And we'll see how your screens are updating here. Doesn't look like they've updated quite yet, but we have I'll enter our initial on-hand inventory. I'll enter our maximum inventory. I'll say 10 pieces here and our trigger point of 5. And so just as simple as that, we can enter our replenishment pull data on the left side of the screen there. And then we can run the model. And probably your screens aren't going to quite update fast enough on this webinar to see the model actually running. But as the model runs, you can see the little black dots. I saw some of them appeared on your screen there. The little black dots that appear above the queue as them. And then we get our statistics of what the lead time was for inventory to get to this particular point in the process, and what our utilization of our station was and whatnot. And so we have a modeling tool that's available now, so we can build pull systems and other lean items directly into our models. What we've tried to do with Process Playground is take most of the standard lean and Lean Six Sigma tools that might be difficult to model in a traditional simulator and make those easy and inherent in the design of the Process Playground Simulator. All right, I believe I've consumed my 45 minutes of time here. So Larry, I guess I'll pass it back over to you for any questions that may have come in during the talk here.
All right, thanks, Lars. This ends the prepared portion of the webcast. So at this time, we will address some of the questions that have come in. I have a few questions already. Now is the best time if you want to type them in that question box on the side. We will try and get to as many as we can. So, Lars, here's the first question. It's a little bit long. It has to do with consumables, so stocking consumables. And I'll just, it's from Peter. I guess I'll just say most of it because I think it's a well-phrased question. Is there any way of managing the length of time individual pieces of inventory are in the system? For example, if I'm using a replenishment pull system for stocking consumables, which deteriorate or lose value over time, I may want to have some sense of the average age or length of time that any piece of stock is in inventory. So how would you determine the average time based on the working stock, safety stock, and the replenishment stock levels and demand patterns when dealing with these individual consumables?
Okay, that's a great question. So this is all our on-hand inventory, items that are actually on hand, and we want to make sure that they don't deteriorate beyond their useful life while we have them on hand. And so that, because that is on hand, that drives us to our two buckets of on-hand inventory, which is working stock and safety stock. Remember that working stock is our sizing for working stock is our demand rate, right? So demand times our cycle time. And then safety. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we choose our cycle time and our safety stock such that 100% of this on-hand inventory is actually cycling within that 10 days, right? So our safety stock component, right, that's sort of our base amount of material that's going to be sitting there, and then we have our sawtooth of working stock above it, right? So what we'll want to do is we'll want to make sure that the sum of working stock plus safety stock is less than or equal to 10 days worth of material. 10 days worth of material at 2 pieces per day is going to be 20 days, or 20 pieces rather, right? So working stock plus safety stock has to be less than or equal to 20 pieces of inventory total. And depending on how much variation you have in your rate, that will impact how much safety stock we are actually going to have. So we'd actually do the safety stock calculation first, and based on whatever that average demand and that standard deviation demand is, we'd get some safety stock number. Say that safety stock number comes out at 3.5. So we round that 3.5 up to 4 pieces. So we have 4 pieces of safety stock, and let's say we want to be a little bit conservative and leave ourselves, we can go 10 days if we need to on this material, but let's say we want to shoot more towards 8 days or something like that. So we have a couple days of slack there. So at 8 days, at 2 pieces per day, that would be 16 pieces of inventory. And of that 16 pieces, we're already consuming 4 in safety stock, so that drives us to 12 pieces that we would want to put into working stock. At 2 per day, that means we have 6 days of working stock. And so our cycle time becomes 6 days of working stock, and we have 2 days of safety stock, right? So 6 days working stock, 2 days safety stock, which gives us a total of 8 days combined of on-hand inventory there within our 10-day parameter. And then we just want to make sure that when we set up our physical buffer, that physical buffer is a true FIFO where safety stock as well as working stock, the physical units there, are truly flowing in a first in, first out. Remember that safety stock, when we talk about safety stock, that's a mathematical, logical idea there. But in terms of inventory actually flowing, we obviously don't keep a safety stock of milk cooler that doesn't move. We keep some extra gallons in there that are constantly moving, and those represent our safety stock to buffer against abnormally high demand, but we still want that inventory moving. So when you have this requirement that you meet a certain turn rate on your inventory, start with that turn rate, then calculate your safety stock. Once that's calculated, that will tell you how many more days or pieces worth of working stock you can have in your system. And if you size it any larger than that, then you're going to run into a problem of your consumables going stale.
Great answer,
Hopefully hopefully that answers it.
Yeah, I think you did. Here's another question, sort of along a similar tangent. Is Linda says that this looks good for the theory of a few items, but can you maybe talk to how this would work for really large quantities of items?
Really large part number counts in terms of lots of parts?
I think so. I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Just how would you scale it up to a really big system?
Yeah. Okay. So this gets more into an issue of implementation. And implementation, of course, that's where the rubber meets the road, and can get quite a bit more nuanced, to say the least. So when dealing with large numbers of parts, then most of the time we move to an electronic system. And in an electronic system, we can actually take advantage of many of the same types of reports and human triggering mechanisms that we would use in an MRP system, in terms of a dispatch list that might list off the material requisitions. What we would do is we would just change the logic, the scenes, on how we're actually triggering those parts. So thinking back to a J.D. Edwards system that I worked with once, where the ordering was done in a traditional MRP method, where the master planner put in the planned orders, and those planned orders then triggered all the cascading effects of all the material orders that needed to happen to meet those plans. And what we did is we did a little bit of custom programming to replace that logic, or supplement that logic, with some simple pull system logic. And we put those parts that we wanted to onto the replenishment pull system. Some parts we still maintained on the MRP system because the demand was so unpredictable and unstable that we really didn't want to make those to stock. We only wanted to make them to order. And so we actually had parts working side by side, where we would have some parts on replenishment pull, some on an MRP planning type of logic. And all of those triggers, whenever we needed an order, they would come out together on a single dispatch list. And that worked very well. The buyers didn't have to worry about working with one system or the other and figuring out which system was triggering the order. They simply got a list of orders that needed to be placed. Where they came from, they could, of course, research that, but it wasn't really necessary. So an electronic system like that works very well for lots of parts. That particular one was actually coded and embedded directly into the MRP system. We have also used electronic systems in the form of database systems, where we used outside of the main ERP system, we would use an access database or the equivalent to actually size and manage many, many parts. That became a bit of a nuisance in some cases, because you do have to get that consumption and usage data as well as they're played into that database on a daily basis. So that can become a little bit more taxing, whereas your MRP system might be perhaps set up to already bring that data in directly. Now, that's not to say that Kanban card systems are totally out of the picture either. And there my pen, oh, there we are, Kanban. Kanban systems. So these are the card systems where we actually would have individual cards for every single part, and we would have perhaps multiple cards for each part. And these Kanban systems will work for many, many parts. It can become a little bit burdensome, because we can have lots and lots of cards flying all over the facility, and the Kanban card-based systems do require discipline to make sure that those cards are not lost and are still used. But Toyota actually worked with physical Kanban cards up until just recently. In the past 10 years or so, they actually from the Kanban cards, where they were actually taking these physical Kanban cards and dropping them in the mailboxes, and they were actually federally expressing Kanban cards between different locations to signal the replenishment orders. And it took a lot of discipline, to be sure, but they actually did use that system up until relatively recently. So there are a couple different ways you can implement it. With database and MRP systems, I've done replenishment pull implementations with in excess of 20,000 parts in one location, all being managed with the replenishment pull logic. We just had to embed that replenishment pull logic into a user interface that made it easy for the planners and the buyers to understand, access, and work with that data. So hopefully that was the direction of the question.
Well, a similar question, Lars, with an ERP system. Eric wanted to know, with a typical system, a really big one, let's say like an Oracle system, are these tools typically part of it, or you said earlier that you did some customization work? Do they have to be applied independently of the system? How sophisticated do these big systems get with this sort of stuff?
What I've seen is that with Oracle and SAP and Bond and JD Edwards, most of the big ERP systems, the traditional replenishment pull logic is not explicitly part of the stock product. It, of course, can be easily programmed into the product. Most of them do include an order point logic. And so the order point logic that is included in most of these systems can act quite similar to a replenishment pull system logic, because you do set a maximum for that inventory for that item, and you do set a trigger point. What you have to be very careful about in order point systems is how much visibility they have. In MRP systems, in these big ERP systems, we get to define many, many, many inventory locations. And those inventory locations can be on-hand, on-site, on-hand, off-site, on-order locations. So we have lots and lots of different locations. And so as we're defining all those different locations, and it seems to be a tradition that we create many, many, many locations. And with all those locations, then we have to be very careful about whether or not those are all what are called netting locations, and whether or not the inventory in those locations is netted into the calculation for total on hand and on order. And that netting is what usually trips up most of the systems, is being able to truly get that visibility to the full inventory on hand plus on order. And that netting is usually what ends up tripping up the system. Not to say that they can't be implemented correctly to do that from the start, but usually if you're trying to retrofit some replenishment pull into a system, it can become a bit of a challenge to understand all those different locations and which of those locations net into the calculation of total on hand and which ones don't net. And if you have any leakage where items can go to a location and then no longer be visible to the replenishment pull system, that's just as though it was an abnormal demand, and that inventory was consumed, and the pull system will of course trigger to try to replenish that inventory. So it certainly can be done, and the order point logic is directionally very correct for doing that, but you have to be very, very careful in the implementation. And most large-scale implementations of ERP systems sufficiently complex that you'll spend a fair bit of time in the test environment or the simulated environment trying to understand what exactly is netting, what isn't netting, where those locations are, how those transactions are transacted, and can also get into a little bit of issue of how many extra portions of lead time go into the planned times there. You'll have the true vendor lead time, then you'll have transport time, then you'll have pick and place time, and move time and whatnot, and get a lot of times that add together. And sometimes it can take a little bit of work to understand what's going on there as well.
Okay, well that takes us to almost an hour. We have a number, Lars, we have a number of, I think, excellent questions that are still remaining. So maybe what we can do is try and address these in a document that we post on the website.
Absolutely, yeah. All the questions that have come in, Larry, if you can just collate those and email them over to me, then I will put together some answers for those, and we'll get them up on the website along with the deck and the spreadsheet.
Great, great. I know everyone appreciates that. So just a reminder, we'll be uploading the recorded presentation, slides, and other materials to our site within the next day. And you will receive a follow-up email tomorrow from GoToWebinar with a link to the materials. So don't worry, it'll come in, and you'll just be able to click right over to the website. If you've enjoyed one or all of these fall webcasts, I encourage you to subscribe to the More Steam newsletter, which features Lean and Six Sigma news and resources like these sort of webcasts. This concludes our webcast for today. Thank you for attending.